Although my favorite is bow and arrow. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's, I think, like the most, that feels like the most kind of sporting.
What kind of bow do you have?
Gosh.
Mark Zuckerberg and his company Meta are no longer woke and have officially transitioned to based.
Do you know the company that makes it?
Not off the top of my head.
After meeting with Daddy Trump at Mar-a-Lago, the Zuck man announced major changes to Meta's online speech policies for Facebook and Instagram. These changes include loosening restrictions when discussing social issues, removing fact-checking, and ending some of its DEI initiatives. Zuckerberg's decision has been followed by a cringe-inducing media tour that has seen the billionaire nerd joining the bro whisperer Joe Rogan on his podcast to discuss, among other things, masculinity and jujitsu.
Okay, masculinity is toxic. We have to get rid of it completely. It's like, no.
Similar to the way that his fellow billionaire nerds Musk and Peter Thiel have used Joe Rogan's podcast to sell their tech accelerationist fascism, whatever, to Black Rifle coffee drinkers.
The woke ideology makes humor illegal.
Yes.
So when there's so many humor no-fly zones,
right?
You can't make fun of anything.
Similarly, the Zuck man portrayed himself as just sort of like a common sense business owner who's just tired of all this woke nonsense and just wants things to go back to being normal.
Yeah, no, I mostly use a rifle just because it's so much more efficient. Your conversion rate is so much higher.
He's just like you and me. However, despite the Zuck man's new Gen Z crypto bro aesthetic or right-coded everyday man personality change, this sort of rapid adaptation of changing cultural and political forces isn't anything new for these billionaires. In 2016, Zuck defended fake news on Facebook. In 2017, he apologized for fake news on Facebook. In 2021, he complied with government to censor COVID posts and banned Trump. In 2024, he said he regrets complying with government to censor COVID posts. Now in 2025, he's against restrictions on certain types of speech. Who knows what the future holds next? All this flip-flopping is because Zuckerberg, similar to his fellow billionaire nerds in big tech, ultimately just want to avoid government regulations, such as the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, as well as continue to be allowed to recruit cheap foreign labor to exploit, such as what the H-1B visas provide these tech companies. In order to secure these privileges, they must continue to appease whatever administration is currently in office. Hence why the Zuck tends to have a personality change every 4 years or so. With this incoming administration, the Trump team favors looser restrictions on censorship, which is why you see this rush from Zuckman and Meta to comply with their new daddy's preferences. And I find this whole ordeal interesting from a cultural perspective. The right wing, including Trump himself, have long criticized tech companies such as Meta for being examples of woke capitalism, also known as rainbow capitalism. This is where corporations opportunistically align themselves with progressive ideologies, despite not really contributing anything substantial or material to the cause. And we all know the examples. Off the top of my head, we've got the gay Bud Light can, end racism on the basketball courts, the woke CIA ads.
I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I am intersectional.
Basically any shallow cringe attempt on behalf of a soulless corporation to publicly say the right thing while actually doing nothing. But where most people just kind of, roll their eyes at what appears to simply be corporations being lame and out of touch like they always have been, conservatives have always seen this display of wokeism from corporations as proof that progressivism is so culturally powerful that it has thoroughly infected their wholly capitalist system. And because of this, institutions such as academia or the EPA must be flushed out because of their proximity to progressivism. It's hilarious that anyone on the right wing could look at this current Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, Biden, and think that they're progressive in any, significant sense. Laughable. Progressivism, as it currently stands right now, has no real power in this country, but I digress. I think what the right wing in this country gets wrong is that while yes, rainbow capitalism is very much a real concept that is widely employed by some of the biggest corporations in this country, however, rainbow capitalism is still capitalism. And under capitalism, corporations like Meta will always prioritize profits over ideology. So if there is a potential factor or impediment to these corporations making their profits, such as the incoming Trump campaign, whose potential FTC chairman has said that he wants to punish companies perceived as censoring conservative voices, then those companies like Meta will not hesitate to change course. No lefty academics or coastal media elites or trans shamans, Chinese spies, nothing is going to keep these corporations from making a buck. Because to these massive companies, woke is not an ideology, but just another flavor to sell consumers. The reality is that most people in this country either A, actively like what conservatives consider woke shit, 2, think it's lame but don't really give a shit, just go about their day or avoid that type of culture, or 3, just straight up don't even know what woke or any of this culture war bullshit is because they're normal and have families. So if you take those 3 groups and add them together, they outnumber the group that actively dislikes wokeism. Now, under the sacred system known as capitalism, those 3 groups comprise a very large, significant consumer base that can generate a company lots of profit. And if there is a dollar to be made, there will be a company to make it. If there was an appetite and a demand for dog shit in this country, there'd be a company willing to sell it to you. I think at the core of conservatives' obsession with wokeism is really just their obsession with wanting to be treated fairly in popular culture. Basically, more or less, since the countercultural movement took off in the 60s, anything even remotely resembling conservatism has been portrayed as either villainous or ridiculed as square. And I mean, on its surface, that makes sense to me. This is a party whose main issues are giving tax breaks to rich people, cutting social spending, and denying climate change. Those are pretty unpalatable issues to, build entertainment around. By the way, I would love to see a film made by conservatives that portrayed giving tax breaks to wealthy people as an entertaining family fun spectacle. But I think all this is changing, and rapidly so. I think what we've been witnessing the last 6 to 8 years or so is a slow shift rightward in popular culture. I think this starts, kind of obviously in the early 2010s with the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Joe Rogan sort of being responsible for redefining the borders of what is considered conservatism. No longer do we think of the Christian nerd who voted for George Bush. The conservative male is now, a masculine entrepreneur who enjoys culturally left-wing things like doing drugs and nutrition. Then following Joe Rogan, you have the explosion in rap country music, which essentially just replaces the black people making hip-hop, at the time the world's most popular genre of music, with white people, and you have them rap about conservative cultural signifiers like beer, God, and trucks.
Farm was a place to go, load a truck up, hit the dirt road.
So 2010s, that's lifestyle and music right there. But then at the same time, you have the rise of operator culture, which overtakes movies and television shows. Operators are like the Navy SEALs that hold their guns sideways like that and are always fighting racially ambiguous enemies in the Middle East or abroad. This is movies such as, Lone Survivor, American Sniper, Zero Dark 30. And this served to reinforce the patriotic part of conservatism tied to military culture. And unlike past failed attempts at conservatives to break through to popular culture, these films would contain some of Hollywood's biggest A-listers like Bradley Cooper, Mark Wahlberg, Chris Hemsworth, etc. And of course, this leads to the explosion in the late 2010s of writer-director Taylor Sheridan with his, conservative extended universe television show saga, starting with Yellowstone and then going into whatever the hell it's on now. These factors, among many others, have gradually snowballed into creating something called based, or, as I'll argue, the woke right. A rising culture of conservatism in which they are the victims in a society that is holding them back from being masculine and patriotic. This can be, Joe Rogan and his comedian friends on a podcast endlessly complaining for 3 hours at a time about all the things that they can't say and cancel culture, how they're victims of this new movement.
It will eventually get to straight white men are not allowed to talk.
In a sense, portraying themselves as victims of a form of oppression, not dissimilar to the previous version of wokeism on the left. When Zuckerberg spoke on Rogan's podcast about masculinity, it was done so from the perspective of perceived suppression within the corporate world, as in some woke social order or something was holding him and others back from being masculine. They are oppressed. In the woke right, it is the conservative versus the rest of the country who seek to destroy their precious traditional way of life. Those who do not understand this paradigm are either woke themselves or normies who need to be awoken, aka red-pilled on certain corners of the internet, and join the fight against the oppressors, the spaghetti-armed liberal arts students that wear ski masks. So zooming out for a second, even having just spoken all that, it feels pretty absurd, and that's because it is. It's almost kind of silly to talk about this shit. But hopefully this demonstrates how much of an absurd waste of time and distraction this is from actual material things that matter. Rising inequality in which the top 10% own approximately 60% of the wealth in America, the skyrocketing cost of literally everything in this country from healthcare to housing to fucking eggs at your grocery store, and a planet that is literally burning from carbon dioxide and methane being trapped in the ozone. Those are issues that affect literally every single person in this country, if not world. These billionaires and corporations use culture to separate you into binary camps so that you feel like you're being victimized by the other side. Also that you don't notice that the world that both sides actually occupy is slowly being destroyed. Republican or Democrat, they're the same project with different branding. The quicker we can drop the distinction between right and left and actually direct our anger and vitriol towards the power elite who run this country, the quicker we can stop fucking consuming long-form video essays on YouTube about wokeism.